Hello, everyone. This is Modex Network Voices. My name is Ryan Smith, and here we are going to be having a discussion with Kendra Halliwell. She's an associate principal at Icon Architecture in Boston. Of course, I'm always joined by my partner, Ivan Rupnik. Ivan, like to say hi?
Hi, Ryan.
Thanks for coming again, Ivan. And here is Kendra. Kendra is really gracious to come and share some information with us today about her experience as a design team lead and in her work on modular projects for multifamily. So Kendra, welcome.
Thanks, Ivan and Ryan. I'm really glad to be here.
Ivan and Kendra caught up in Dallas, and of course, they both live in the Boston area, and so she's agreed to come and share some information about her experiences. I think you have some slides to share, and we welcome you to introduce yourself through those slides and your work, and then we'll get into a discussion right after that.
That sounds great. So as Ryan said, I'm an associate principal at Icon Architecture. We're a women-owned, women-run firm in downtown Boston. And my expertise is in multifamily housing, a full range from affordable housing to senior, mixed income, artists live work. Anywhere you live, we build it, and we do believe that everyone should love where they live. I've been fortunate enough to work on the largest multifamily modular project in the city of Boston to date. It's 125 units in the modular building. I'd like to show you some slides of what I learned during this project. I learned a lot, and I feel like these are useful takeaways for anyone looking to design an off-site fabricated multifamily building. So I'll share my screen now.
Thank you.
There we go. Great. So I think I have a few slides here, and they range from sort of overview down into some details. But a quick overview of the project includes two buildings. One is an adaptive reuse with 46 micro units and some retail space out on Cambridge Street. Behind that is the new multifamily modular project, which is 4 stories of combustible wood boxes over a steel podium with a roof deck on top. And the two buildings are connected with an underground corridor. It's really cool. Next slide. Here we are. It is a dense urban site in the city of Boston. It's about 10 minutes from downtown by the Orange Line T, which you could get at Sullivan Square Station. And this area is prime for redevelopment. There's a lot going on right in this area. You can see in the aerial image, I'm going to point up here. So this is our site right here with the modular project. A lot of congestion. One of the great things about doing the offsite manufacturing is that much of the construction happened elsewhere. So we didn't have trucks and drywall deliveries and workers all coming into this already congested part of the city. The framework for the team is a little different in an offsite project. It's different from conventional in that while our team under the architect is the overall structural and MEP engineers of record, instead we also had an additional structural engineer who did the modular boxes specifically, and then our engineer took those loads and carried it down into the podium. So there's a slightly different framework. Additionally, the modular manufacturer, in our case, was a sub to the general contractor, and a large sub at that. I think that they had, at least a third of the scope and the fee there. Our schedule, everyone wants to know what the schedule looks like in this type of project. We were able to save some money in the sense that the schedule is shorter. That's what the graph at the bottom shows. The blue line is a typical project where the costs sort of incrementally, gradually, and continuously increase, whereas the orange line shows a modular project where you do have to put more money up front, but ideally it ends a little more briefly. We were doing our design and detailing while we were still going through permitting. Our client really wanted to follow this path, and they did decide early. I think it's key that you get your team together. That includes your owner, your general contractor, and your manufacturer, because each manufacturer does works a little differently. So you need to make those decisions early. And you're building in the factory, so you don't want to make changes after it's already built. And the goal is to save 3 to 6 months. You are able to build your podium as the finishes are being installed in the box. So this image shows 2 photographs that were taken during the same week. As we were finishing our podium, they were installing tile, kitchen cabinets, fixtures, lighting, paint, and windows, all in the factory before we even had a podium. These 2 images show where we started. The image on the left is our conventional layout with a red pen drawings from the modular manufacturer suggesting how we might transform this into a modular project. And we did have to make some changes, making this U-shape, how do we deal with the inside corners? It was a little tricky. The image on the right shows where we ended up. We have some apartments actually straddle, some boxes contain 3 pieces of different apartments there. You can see we also had some unusual shapes on the corners. Being wood construction, we were able to build this in the factory. They pretty much said, whatever you build, draw it and we can build it within this framework. Similarly, there are some changes to how you might lay out an apartment. The image on the left shows a conventional construction, 1 bedroom, and the right shows a modular layout. The conventional unit is about 625 square feet. The modular is about 748 square feet. The difference here is that we decided for the modular approach to keep the boxes all the same size. For our next project, we're looking at modifying the bedroom box to be a little narrower, the living room box to be wider. You do have to respect that demising line in the middle. That's critical. You can see in the modular layout, we only have a couple of doorways that broach that. You really want to make all your connections through the corridor. So the mechanical spaces and closets and connections are all allowed to happen on the corridor rather than sort of wherever you want on the conventional layout. See, coordination and communication is really important. While the architect builds with some sort of 3D modeling program to really look at it 3-dimensionally, the contractor also does that. I would suggest that you have a VDC coordinator. Typically this is under the contractor, but it's another team member who is absolutely critical, adds some cost, but is absolutely worth it. We worked with a virtual design construction coordinator who really looked at all the details, specifically mechanically, on how to get this all to the corridor and how to run it through the building. Typical multifamily construction has tight corridor limits with everything that we're trying to put in there. In modular, it's even harder because you are bringing even more to the corridor. I would suggest that when you're looking for a modular manufacturer, that you find someone who might also be working in the same program. In our case, we felt like we had to step back because the manufacturer worked in 2D CAD. So communicating all of the details and the tight tolerances that we designed was really important. Here's an image, for example, we brought all of our mechanicals, our ducts and systems through a 3-inch plinth between boxes in the floor ceiling assembly. So everything had to come out at the very top of the unit to make those connections in. We visited the factory. Just like any construction site, you need to keep an eye on what's going on. We allotted 1 visit a week to go up there and found that it was important to have more people up there for a little more time to really keep an eye on things. This factory was incredible. They work multi-dimensionally. In the image at the bottom left, they're building the wall panels and the floor panels and the ceiling panels all at the same time and then bringing it together. They also have below grade access to do plumbing and connections, much like a car mechanic. And they flew the boxes pretty quickly. Each box took about 45 minutes to stack on site. They're wrapped in plastic And there are 3 guys with walkie-talkies, in our case speaking French, who knew exactly what they're doing because they do this all the time to get it safe and meet all the tolerances. This is a diagram I put together to show how the building comes together. The image at the top left shows our podium. When the podium went up, they started stacking at the top right corner and built a little ziggurat, because you want to build all the way up when you're stacking. We broke the building into phases. So in the first week, we had a quarter of the building up, including a fully functional egress stair that you can actually walk up. The box arrives with half the stair installed and the stringers and risers and treads sort of laying loose so you can put it together. That's one of the biggest adjustments that site workers have is seeing this building go up where there wasn't a building there a day before. So the first week went up, the second week went up, and we had half of our building. The red plane there is our fire separation that was built conventionally, took another week. And then during the, the 4th week, we had 3/4 of the building, and instead of building a typical elevator tower that goes up as a solid tower out of CMU, we had to convince the site guys, the masons, to wait until we built around it, because we wanted to bring the boxes in, build around it, and then convince them to go in and build inside that void to fill the tower. That was a very different approach for everybody. Then lastly, week 5, the last significant portion of the building went up. What I would recommend that I wish I had known at this time was we got all the smaller bits and pieces at the end. So we had some wedges that on the outside faces. We had some sort of screen walls up on the roof for the mechanicals, but we also needed parapet walls in order to complete our insulation on the roof. If we had had our parapet walls during week 2, we could have been actually sloping the roof and moving the project forward a little quicker if we had the parapet walls to build to. A couple images of the project as completed. It's beautiful. We're very proud of it. The sound separation is unsurpassable, both in the corridors and in the units. I don't know what the actual STC rating is. I keep meaning to look it up. I just know that it's like you're in a cave. It's amazing how quiet it is and sturdy. So the sound separation and the insulation is really great. We had the exterior insulation was installed in the factory, and this building is all electric, and with exterior insulation was installed in the factory. So we met LEED Gold without any trouble at all. I think I've got a last image of what the building looked like in completion. It's the design of this building draws from the adjacent industrial qualities of the existing graphic arts finishers building with the large format windows and planar industrial language. So my lessons learned are that you should decide to do modular early and try not to make changes. Modular construction can save time, but it's not a silver bullet. People think it might cost less, but it actually requires more materials because of the double walls and double floors. You can design whatever you want as long as you coordinate. There are different ways to have larger spans. We have almost 9-foot ceilings in here. We only have soffits in a few places. So get rid of your preconceptions for what it might look like, collaborate, and spend time at the factory. So those are my takeaways from what I learned.
Well,
how's that?
Yeah, that's great, Kendra. Thank you so much for both the breadth and the depth. It's a very nice T. We like T's in our ModX voices. So, both understanding the big implications and also really understanding the sort of the key decisions that you've made. Since we have you here and you've had some also unique experiences in other systems, let me start with a larger question, something we came across when we were doing work for the Modular Building Institute in terms of growing the market of modular in general and a way of also improving housing affordability and accessibility in the US, which there's a bit of a kind of miscommunication, let's say, between manufacturers. So when we talk to manufacturers, they tend to blame clients and architects for a lack of standardization. And at the same time, architects sometimes fear, architects who haven't worked with modular, that we interviewed for this, also fear that same possible standardization boogeyman that says, you know, eventually both my services as well as my freedom will be taken away. So we'd love to talk a little bit and maybe educate everyone, both manufacturers and architects. You've had experience with this and you seem to have gotten really beautiful, but also very custom building out of the process. What do you think about increased standardization in the industry from specifications on the one hand, and what should be standardized maybe and what shouldn't be? So just beyond your own experiences, what do you, if we were going to tell the AIA or MBI, what should we be standardizing and what shouldn't we be standardizing? And how does that interface from a design perspective and a value perspective?
Yeah. Well, I think it's very much like the standardization that we have in conventional construction, things like the floor ceiling assembly. It's not rocket science. We use the same systems over and over again. And so I think if the manufacturing industry were able to refine those and promote those, then that would make it easier and probably solve some headaches on all sides. I think I mentioned in our discussion earlier that if there were support for UL ratings, that would be the key to reassuring everyone involved, from regulating agencies to architects to local agencies, and it would help. I think it would help across the country, across the board. I think that would help move the industry forward, this industry forward.
Great. And then maybe following up. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to, I think that, modular technologies, offsite fabrication, it's another tool in our toolbox. It's not, it's not trying to do everything completely differently, but I think we need people to understand how to use it. And so any guidance is appreciated. Great.
Yeah, and then also from a different perspective, Icon Architects and yourself have had a lot of experience in multifamily housing. And then some of the things that you brought up I thought were really important to bring up, which is some of the things that actually, so in some ways modular can be faster. It can at least be comparable in cost and faster in construction. Sometimes it can be cost savings. But there's another aspect which I think the three of us care about, which is making better housing, not just making faster or cheaper housing. And so you started, and I just wanted to come back to some of those points because I think they're key points. Sound insulation in urban buildings, which is a big problem in lightwood frame construction. I grew up in for lack of a better word, crappy lightwood frame apartment building as a kid, and certainly suffered from that. So sound insulation, the ability to achieve a kind of a higher environmental performance, which unfortunately is not something we're required to do yet, but it's something we're encouraged to do in places like Europe. It's just the way things are done. So maybe talking about just the potential quality of how housing is something that we don't maybe often talk enough about in the modular side. This isn't just faster, it isn't just more affordable, it's potentially higher quality, at least when you compare apples to apples, lightwood frame, conventional. Is that something you've experienced? You have a lot of experience with conventional urban multifamily lightwood frame.
Yeah, well, one of the what I've seen is often with site-built construction, there's water damage. It's out there for the elements until it's done. So there's almost always water damage, and no matter what you do to mitigate that, it's quite likely to happen. Whereas if you're building in the factory, the quality is going to be better. It's built under a roof. It's not going to get rained on. You also have guys and girls who are trained in what they're doing very specifically. The trim guy knows exactly what he's doing. He doesn't have to walk very far. He doesn't have to carry things up and down stairs. The process is more seamless, and the craftsmanship can be better as well. And those who are working, they're not spending time carrying materials up and down stairs or loading it in through a window. It's right there on the shelf, and they can take the leftover pieces and put it up to the side to use again. So it's efficient both in sort of labor and in materials. It's also you can make a building much more airtight, and airtightness is one of the key factors to improving building efficiency and getting to passive house. These are all ways to build better. I think that's my take on
no,
build.
and the higher quality, because I think it's maybe the question shouldn't just be should we make things cheaper, but how can we build better and more with the higher quality as well. And I think that's what you've shown. Maybe and my last question, leave Ryan to kind of pull it together and wrap it up. My last question also, I know that you're now, and I know these are new projects, and so there's some secrecy involved, and we're familiar with that. But if you can speak a little bit, I know you're working with a manufacturer who's working in steel from a different context. Can you maybe give us some insights into, you have experience now with Lightwood Frame, Modular. What are some of the similarities or differences in steel that you're experiencing in your new project?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, after doing the graphic project, I learned so much. And I feel like coming out of it, I felt like I understood how systems should work in general, and was ready to go into my next modular project, which then turned out to be a steel and concrete frame, which has a completely different set of problems. It's also high-rise, so bringing high-rise code in there, looking at those details. We're still figuring those out, but it's interesting. The basic systems, the concept, the sort of core concept is that you have these boxes that connect into the building systems in the corridor. That stays the same. But then figuring out the details is another adventure. We're also working on a much smaller project as well, which is 12 units of sort of single room occupancy for formerly homeless. And that's in an area where construction costs are low, but housing costs are also low, but there's still a need to provide housing for very, very low income people. And we're seeing in the Boston area, we're seeing opportunities. It's probably exceptional, but to do mixed income where the market rate housing helps to subsidize the lower income. And so we're seeing that in a number of sites across the city. This one is exceptional, and we're hoping that it will move forward. We are working with a European manufacturer to try to figure out the details and work through the code issues that are here. One aspect of urban development in this city is that I would be remiss to not mention is the design reviews that we have to go through for zoning or various community engagement here. And so for any of these projects, working through the design of these projects, you can't just stack up a bunch of boxes and call it a day. It has to look good, and you have to work on the design both for the contextual neighborhood as well as the design review for the city, and then also figure out how to incorporate that into the manufactured system. So there's a lot of fun things to figure out.
Kendra, as a kind of closing question, just have a question about sort of contract and project delivery. Was the decision to go modular one that was brought by the owner developer from the beginning?
It was. We had looked to this site a few different ways with them, and then it sort of sat quietly for a few months, and then they came back and had determined that following a modular process would bring this building online sooner in order to get it out and leased up earlier. And so they're the ones who brought that to the table.
And was it competitively bid, both from the GC perspective and the modular factory?
It was. There were many interviews of many different contractors. I know that. I think the benefit of bringing the team together early is critical, because otherwise you're sort of designing things, and then when you bring the contractor on, you have to come back to it again. So in this case, we did, there were multiple conversations with multiple contractors, and I know that there was a lot of local involvement in the site work on the site here.
Yeah. Okay. We're just finding that finding the right manufacturer for the modules is really critical for these projects, and just trying to understand your involvement as an architect in that process.
Yeah. Well, we did, so in terms of the manufacturer, we did interview many, we looked into many manufacturers in the area. What is unfortunate here is that we don't have a lot of options. The scale of the manufacturers in this area is limited. And while there are a number of smaller manufacturers, they prefer, taking on 125 boxes, that fills up their factory for a month, is, many of the manufacturers are more comfortable with a smaller scale. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
so I'd love, yeah.
Well, could you answer the question? I found it fascinating that you decided to erect the boxes and then the cores in the void that was created. Usually you do the core and then you wrap the boxes around. Could you talk about why you decided to go that direction?
Well, I think that was upon advice of the manufacturer, because as they're swinging the boxes, they didn't want to knock that tower down. Mm-hmm. And so it was safer, just sort of strategically, means and methods, that was the better way to do it.
It's fascinating.
And I thought it was really great that the stairs were built into the boxes as well.
Right.
That sped everything up.
This has been a very insightful conversation, Kendra, and we hope to get you back on ModX Network Voices, maybe for a webinar with some architects, talk about design. Want to thank you and Ivan for joining. And if you want to get a hold of Kendra, she can be found at Icon Architecture. We'll also have some links to her firm on this post. So thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, Kendra. Appreciate it.
Likewise. Thanks, guys.